All right, welcome to our third Submersion Series webinar. Our topic today is technical assistance and capacity at the local level. So you should be hearing me, and if not, hopefully you're adjusting with your settings. And if you want to acknowledge you hear me, please test your reactions within the Zoom tools and controls. So I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm your host for today. I'm a coordinator for the Water Quality Goal Implementation Team, and I'm with the Chesapeake Research Consortium. So I first want to go over some ground rules. We would like people to enter their name and affiliation in the chat box as we get underway, so we know where you're all joining us from and to maybe grow our networks a little bit through our conversation. We ask everyone to use the chat function throughout the webinar to ask your questions for speakers and interact with one another. We also encourage you to use the reactions feature of Zoom throughout just to help keep things lighthearted and positive. Some of our speakers may crack some jokes and want to know they landed. We also ask that while our speakers are presenting, that people stay muted with their cameras off to avoid disruptions and to, again, use the chat feature for questions and comments. A few more ground rules. We will have some time for clarifying questions after each presentation, but we will have more time for discussion at the end, and we will welcome verbal discussion if people want at that time at the end. But you can also continue to use the chat feature. If you're having questions or issues, Jackie's email is there on the screen. My email is also on the webpage and on the agenda. If you're having any issues, the slides will be posted for any slides that aren't already posted, and the recording will be available on YouTube. So just a quick synopsis before we get underway, like why we're here. This is not a typical water quality goal team meeting. For those who don't know or are joining us from outside our typical structure, the water quality goal implementation team is charged to evaluate, focus, and accelerate the implementation of practices, policies, programs that will restore water quality in the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries to conditions that support living resources and protect human health. So that's what their job is within the Bay program structure. But we acknowledged that we often struggle finding time on our normal standing meetings to tackle tougher issues and priority issues. So we eventually came up with this concept of the Submersion Series, which is a discussion series where we hope to host exploratory and collaborative conversations that challenge us to confront emerging scientific or social lessons with our management opportunities. So we try to design these for contribution with a balance of consumption and some PowerPoints so that we also can strive to include a diverse range of experts and professionals to have honest conversations with our participants around critical topics. And so I challenge everyone to, though this is a recorded session, I want to challenge everyone to share and contribute their own ideas and thoughts and questions. And I will say right now, though, that our thoughts and questions expressed in our shared space today are our own and not necessarily those of our organizations, the Water Quality Goal Team and its leadership, or the Bay Program partnership. And so to reiterate, the point of sessions like today is to foster connection within the Water Quality GIT and across the partnership, and to improve our collective ability to innovate in the face of our biggest challenges and opportunities. So as our third session, see the attendance counter ticking up as we go, and that's great. That's what I love to see. And I want to thank all of you for showing up, because whatever your affiliation might be, regardless of where you live or work, we are all online because you're invested into Chesapeake Bay restoration or environmental issues more broadly. So we all have a shared vision. Might look something like the 2014 watershed agreement vision, might be slightly different, but we all care, and that's why we're here. And I want to acknowledge the village it takes to put this together, especially the core planning team, our moderators and content leads, Aaron and Ruth, and Jackie was also very instrumental, the water quality goal team, leadership team, and of course, our fabulous speakers you'll be hearing from. And of course, once again, thank you for showing up and joining us either live or watching the recording. So a quick reminder of our slate of speakers today. We've got 4 lined up, sharing 20-minute segments. And Then we will have some time, like I said, for discussion and wrap up, and we'll try to adjourn promptly at 12:30. So with that, I will hand it off to Aaron to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Erin Trova. I am an extension educator with Penn State, and I work for the Center for Agricultural Conservation Assistance Training. I'll be helping to introduce the speakers today and moderate, and Ruth Casselli will be also moderating the chat box for any questions. So if you have any questions for the speakers during the session, please pop them into the chat box. I see that people are already dropping their names and affiliations into the chat box. So thank you for doing that. You can continue to do that as you pop in. And I wanted to also say thank you for all of you who offered some of your perspectives on the topic for today, which is building local capacity and sustaining local capacity when you were registered. It helped us to kind of summarize and share those thoughts with our speakers ahead of time. So what I will do today, I will introduce each speaker, and then Ruth will find some clarifying questions that we can pass on to each speaker before the next one is introduced. But if you have a broader discussion question, we can kind of save that towards the end for more of a group level discussion. So first up today, we have Jen Fetter from the Center for Agricultural Conservation Assistance Training. Go for it, Jen.
Great. Thanks, Erin. I appreciate the introduction. As Erin said, my name is Jen Fetter. I'm the Director of Penn State Extension's new Center for Ag Conservation Assistance Training, and I was asked to talk a little bit about what we are doing to address the needs for more capacity in ag conservation here in Pennsylvania, and some of the early successes we've had and kind of what the challenges are that we're trying to address. So I think it's helpful to take a little glimpse into recent history to talk about how our center came to be and some of the issues that we have here in Pennsylvania. Agriculture is, for those of you who are not in Pennsylvania or don't follow Pennsylvania too closely, it is our #1 industry. It's an important source of employment and revenue and business and food, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. It's also the #1 contributor to nutrient and sediment issues in the Chesapeake Bay here in Pennsylvania. So we have a difficult balancing act that we're constantly trying to address here, and we've been talking about for many decades. Back in 2016, Penn State hosted the first of a series of modern PA in the balance conferences. There was one prior to that, slightly different conversation, but we've been talking about how to balance that need to reduce nutrient and sediment loading from the agricultural industry into our waterways, but also promote and sustain this important industry here and make agriculture profitable for Pennsylvania. And so in 2016, we identified 7 key areas of focus out of that first PA in the Balance Conference to think about what we could do to improve that balance and make it better. And we've achieved quite a number of things on this list over time. But one of the things that we continue to struggle with is down in the bottom left corner here, kind of trying to balance that 3-pronged approach of education, outreach, technical assistance, and enforcement, and really having enough people to do all of those things, but especially the technical assistance piece of that puzzle. So one of the big initiatives that came out of there was increasing technical capacity for conservation, training opportunities for developing and designing and building out these practices in ag conservation here in Pennsylvania, trying to get our conservation professional network to really have more technical capacity to do some of the work themselves, to bring more people and more bodies into Pennsylvania to help with these issues, not to recreate or eliminate the existing USDA programs in the state and other state training programs, but to really complement those, enhance them, build them, because it just continues to be the bottleneck here in Pennsylvania when it comes to getting ag conservation practices on the ground. In 2022, we were very fortunate to have the state legislature pass the new state budget with a new line that was referred to as the Clean Streams Fund. And in that fund, a huge portion of the initial allocation for the Clean Streams Fund was dedicated to a new ag conservation assistance program here in Pennsylvania. This is the first time the state has a dedicated line of funding. It was filled with ARPA funds, Recovery Act funds initially, but we are continuing to work with the legislature to see what opportunities exist to continue funding that line in the budget. And we're just happy that it was an actual line added to the budget. As part of that new ag conservation assistance program to pay for practices here in Pennsylvania in ag landscapes, there's also a portion of funds there that were delegated to us at Penn State to provide a new training and technical assistance center to help administer this new program. After the Clean Streams Fund was passed, we did hold another PA in the Balance Conference here in December of 2022, just to look at where our bottlenecks still are and how we're going to spend all of this new influx of funding, not only from the ACAP funding, but from Farm Bill and from other programs that are out there putting more and more money towards ag conservation practices. And one of the big recommendations to help successfully implement all those funds was, again, investing in workforce development and positioning Pennsylvania as an innovation hub for ag and natural resources conservation. And that includes, again, technical assistance training and workforce recruitment and all of those issues we've been talking about since 2016. So we have not yet solved that problem here in Pennsylvania. Which is why dedicating some funds in the ACAP program for our new center was so critical and continues to be a really important approach to increasing our technical assistance capacity here in Pennsylvania. So some of the things that we're doing in the early years, really getting the center up and running. It's not easy to start from the very beginning. I know many of you are involved in great and amazing programs, and some of you were part of the genesis of your own programs. And just because you've got a big pot of money doesn't mean that you have the capacity to just start doing everything. So we've spent the last year really getting our staff up and running. Erin actually introduced herself as a member of our staff. She's been part of the group running these webinars since before she was part of our staff. So we're really excited to have her on board, along with several other educators, some GIS specialists. We're working on new faculty members and partnering with engineering programs. We'll talk a little bit more about some of that, but really getting our program up and running, and then start providing our training and education programs, providing a means to communicate with us. We're not a physical center. We're not focused on all showing up in a building and punching a clock every day. We're really out and about across Pennsylvania, helping provide the support that's needed. So I'll talk about some of these things in more detail here, but one of the other things I wanted to point out really early on in this process, our center is funded and supported by the ACAP program, which is managed by Pennsylvania State Conservation Commission. But we're also working very closely with the state NRCS to help support and complement the work that they're doing, and that they can do the same, help support and complement the work that we're doing in the center. And we actually work together to create a memorandum of understanding around that, which we refer to as the Partners in Ag Conservation Excellence here in Pennsylvania, which is really important for us, that we're constantly codifying this as a partnership effort. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not substituting anybody's program or taking anyone's program away from them. We're all really committed to working together here. So some of the education and training programs, our goal is to bring the existing conservation professional audience in the ag sector together and provide more opportunities for building their skills. And we have three major programmatic areas that we're focused on. One is, of course, administering the ACAP program here in Pennsylvania and helping to kind of go over the guidelines, the policies, what the money can be spent on, what it can't be, what reporting and things like that need to be done. But more importantly, thinking outside the ACAP program and just thinking about ag conservation in general, the need for more ag literacy. We have a lot of young people going into further education on conservation, and they're out there looking for jobs in the conservation sector and finding here in Pennsylvania that many of those jobs are in agriculture, but many of them did not go to school for ag specifically. They went for environmental sciences or some other conservation related career. And so they've got a little bit of a learning curve speed on what is going on in ag in Pennsylvania and understanding the importance of the ag industry and what those operations look like and how the practices interact with or might be barriers to a profitable ag operation. And then, of course, our third major training bucket is around the conservation practices themselves and the design, the implementation, the resource concerns that they're addressing. So that's a big part of what we're doing. And then doing that in a multifaceted way, as many different kinds of ways that we can reach our audience as possible. The other big thing that's happening here in Pennsylvania is that we are putting together a new certification program for conservation professionals through the center. So we are working with, we actually just announced in the press this week, our contract with HRG as the engineer firm that is going to be providing support for our center and the ACAP program. We'll be working with them to develop a program that helps get ag conservation professionals at county conservation districts and our NGO partners, even in private industry, certified to design and implement certain suites of practices so that they don't have to wait for the professional engineers to bring their technical assistance capacity to the table to implement these projects. There are a lot of lower risk projects out there that can be designed and implemented without an engineering certification. And we really need to take our limited engineer pool here in Pennsylvania and dedicate their time and resources to those projects that are high risk, that do need that engineering certification, and help to increase the capacity of the rest of the conservation professional community to do some of these other practices independent of the engineering firms, but under that supervision and oversight still. So we'll be looking at opportunities for getting folks engaged in that program in the next year or so. But we're moving as fast as we can to get that up and running. That really is a big part of what we do. We're also going to be hosting an annual Ag Conservation Conference starting this summer and every year in perpetuity to bring ag conservation professionals together, continue to provide this opportunity to share, to network, to resource, to recognize the good work that's going on, get out in the field, get some hands-on learning, continuing education activities together. We're super excited about that as well. And then we are providing technical assistance out of the center as well in the area of kind of reviewing, helping, especially first few years on the job ag conservation professionals that could use more one-on-one on the job, side-by-side mentorship and training to get them out there and really get them ready to do their jobs quickly. But also in that outreach capacity, you know, practices don't just drop onto farms. And farmers, well, some of them were banging on the door, really wanting the money, but eventually that low-hanging fruit's going to run out. And we need to continue to do that door knocking, talking to farmers, telling them what's available, encouraging them to think about these practices. And so training these staff to do that salesmanship piece is really important. And providing support on some of the engineering practices out there that are more complicated or have a really long wait list that are slowing them down and not getting them on the ground here in Pennsylvania. And then another really big part of the program is actually the piece that Erin is helping us focus on here at the center is the future workforce. So we're working on building the capacity of our existing workforce, but we really do need to be thinking about the future now as well. So we're engaging undergraduate students in thinking about taking their interest in conservation to the ag sector, getting them engaged in coursework that gives them that on-farm experience before they even get out into the workforce. Internships and job shadowing opportunities are coming And then even stepping down into that K through 12 environment and helping to start build that ag literacy and conservation knowledge, and encouraging folks to choose their potential future career paths based on those interests. And of course, this isn't happening in a bubble. I mentioned the two key partners we're working with at USDA and the State Conservation Commission, but we are also working closely with and inviting other partners to the table, looking to keep them engaged as part of the work that happens here in Pennsylvania. We can't do this alone. It's such a huge effort and a huge lift to bring that balance together between ag and the environment. And so we know that we have a lot of great partners out there helping us on these things, and they're not all here listed, but I just wanted you to get a sense of how important that collaboration piece is. So things we're looking to do in the first few years here at the center, as far as impacts go, really getting those conservation professionals trained, providing undergraduate training experiences, getting internships out there, providing that technical assistance. And then hopefully that leads to more ag BMPs being reported and installed on the ground, and increasing the knowledge and independence of our conservation professionals out in the field. That's really what we're aiming for. We've done some stuff so far. We have a website created already, and there's a place to sign up for our monthly Ag Conservation Currents e-news, so you can find out what training events and opportunities are taking place. We've been out visiting all the counties and getting input from stakeholders on what their most critical training needs are. We're contracted with HRG now. We're very excited about that. And we have several supporting work groups established to continue providing oversight and input in the program. Some of the education and opportunities that are out there already. We have GIS tools in development to help with identifying potential funding sources based on geography. We are holding administrative trainings for ACAP. We're helping support NRCS's conservation boot camp here in Pennsylvania so that we can put more people through that every year. We held our first annual Ag Conservation Career Fair last spring, and we're holding another one coming up here in March. We are already promoting an ag literacy online course. We've been holding field days around ag equipment and understanding how it works, more webinars. And of course, this job approval authority, that new certification program that I mentioned is underway and in development. So we're super excited about that. Couple of long vision things, and then I'll wrap it up here, is just thinking longer. We really do anticipate extended funding for the program, and we're thinking way ahead and not just about these next 3 years, but we know that there is a lot of ag professionals out there that want to do some of this ag conservation work on their own. So we are looking into how to take that content beyond the conservation professional and help equip farmers and other ag professionals to do some of this work themselves. We'll look at other opportunities for certification programs, and part of that really is creating a career pathway for ag conservation professionals so that they stay in the career path, that they don't leave, that they want this recruitment and retention piece to be kind of exciting for them, and that they want to make their career in ag conservation and not just a step on their pathway. So those are kind of the big things that we're looking at, and I'll stop there, take any of the clarifying questions, I guess, and then move to the next person.
Thanks, Jen. I happen to know all of that because I work with you, like you said, but I hope that it was useful to everybody else. Even if you're in other states, you know, it's good to hear from like what's happening in other parts of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and beyond. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but if anybody has a clarifying question for Jen, can you please raise your hand before we move on?
I have a clarifying question. This is Ruth, and I can't find the hand raising function, which is sad since I'm a facilitator, but so I'm just going to jump in. Jen, I was wondering, I mean, this is like, sounds fantastic. What jumped into my head, I know you just mentioned there's farmers who are ag professionals that you have the intention to reach out to directly with some of this. Do you all have plans, or have you thought at all about farmer mentorship programs where you have farmer to farmer training?
Yeah, so I should point out that, our extension program is already doing those kinds of programs and doing that kind of work directly with farmers. Our center's primary audience is the conservation professional first.
Okay.
So it's really about networking with our existing extension programs to help them in the existing programs they have direct to farmer, and they do a lot of farm to farm teaching, peer teaching already. So helping them bring conservation practices into those conversations.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Ruth, and thank you, Jen. So next up, we have Casey Filipino, who works at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Take it away, Casey.
Thank you. Just get myself set here. Great. Thanks for having me. We are going to completely shift gears right now and talk about stormwater. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about some of the things going on in stormwater related to capacity, especially as it relates to our local governments. And I'm, going to talk a little bit today about who we are, who is Hampton Roads, what are regional commissions in Virginia, what does all of that mean, what are our goals as a region, and how are we getting to achieve those goals. And this is really specifically related to the Bay TMDL, but also talking a little bit about things in a broader sense. And then through that process, what were the successes and partnerships we've achieved to date? And then, of course, because again, we're talking about capacity issues today. What were some of the roadblocks that we're experiencing now, and how are we going to address those roadblocks in the future? Very much conscious of the Beyond 2025 effort right now. So of course, I can't not think about things in that lens right now, but that's a little bit about what I want to touch on at the end. So who are we? Obviously, this is the Bay watershed here, and you can see Virginia, majority of the state is in the Bay watershed. And then Virginia, the Commonwealth, is broken down into what are called planning district commissions or regional commissions. There are 22 of these, which are state enabled or locally created. And I am a member of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission in the Water Resources Department, working on all things related to stormwater, local water quality, and specifically the Bay TMDL. We're one of the larger regions in the Commonwealth, and partially within the Bay watershed and partially outside of the Bay watershed. We are governed by about 47 commissioners, so made up of all the mayors, elected officials, chief administrative officers of the localities in the region. And our funding generally comes from some state funds. We also get local assessments based on population. And we do have a lot of grants and other funding opportunities that come our way. There are 17 localities in our region, and 15 of those localities are in the Bay watershed in Hampton Roads. Of all of the PDCs, there are 15 of us that are actually in the Bay watershed. And then within our region, like I said, we have 15 that are in or partially in the Bay watershed. 11 of those 15 are actually heavily regulated by municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 permits. So a lot of the work I do is tied to that regulated community. But there's actually a decent amount of our region and also the Commonwealth that is not governed by stormwater permits or any permits, especially if you're in the natural or ag sector. So I kind of broke down our region only by land use, just so you can understand why I'm focusing on stormwater today, why it's so important to us in our region. But we do have quite a bit of natural land. It's wetlands, forest. But we also are mostly governed in this, have a lot of land use in the developed sector. So 25% hold stormwater permits or drain to a stormwater system, and 16% of that land use does not. And we have a little bit of ag. So while we heard a lot about ag in the last presentation, I'm not going to be talking about ag today. So what are our goals? What do we want to achieve? I don't think it's really too different than anybody else on this call in terms of the Bay TMDL. The primary goal, especially if you're talking about the regulated sector, is to decrease total nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. But I mean, in reality, it's everything else. It's not just about those pollutants. It's about the living resources. It's reducing and managing flooding. Specifically to Hampton Roads, if you're living in, near, or on the water, we might be different than the headwater states, but we all have the same, we want to improve our habitats, whether it's for things you love or for the fisheries, just for hiking or whatever. So we're striving for swimmable and fishable waterways, improving, our quality of life for our residents and our water quality as well. In a nutshell, it's improving the quality of life to enjoy the things we love. That's really what we're after. We've got all kinds of different fisheries here. One is the growing shrimp population that's coming because of climate change. So these are things that we're really trying to protect, manage, and understand in the region. And this translates, though, to how we have to do things or how we're addressing things through the Bay TMDL. And that process that we've had to embark upon has been going on for a long time. But specifically, what I want to talk about is the process that started through the Phase 3 WIP development and beyond. Because with that process, we started on something new with the state, with Virginia. They provided funding for the regional commission soil water conservation districts to start thinking about what are the local needs, not in the regulated community, but for the unregulated community, for the agricultural and urban sectors. They really wanted to pivot and focus on those sectors specifically. So they did provide some funding to the PDCs and the regional commissions to start thinking about capacity at the regional level and how you can reach down to the local level and figure out what it is we can do next and what we can incorporate into the WIP to actually lead to reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus and improved water quality. That led to some folks being able to grow capacity at the regional scale. So some PDCs were able to maybe hire somebody part-time or get a consultant to come in or start just engaging things in a different way because they had the opportunity to spend their time and use this money to reach their stakeholders. And so that led to more engagement, identifying the needs, gaps, and interests and incentives that would motivate folks in those communities to think about what BMPs they would implement. Now, the hard part, and the part that I'll talk about a little bit later, is the implementation piece. That's the really tricky part. PDCs, regional commissions are not entities that are building things or putting things in the ground. That's for the local governments to do and the NGOs. So it's growing those partnerships that are going to lead to that implementation that's really key. And that's the piece that we're on the precipice of. And, being asked to do more of that has become a little bit tricky. So that's where the capacity piece really lies. But I'm going to get to that part in a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is some of the successes in the partnerships that have been born because of the increased capacity we've been able to see at the regional scale. So I reached out to my Bay PDC partners and I said, hey, what are you guys doing? What's been working for you? What things have developed since the Phase 3 WIP? We put these plans together and we submitted them, and but really, what's actually happened since then? So lots of different things. We've got increased resource development, so folks are going after more grants for things like park upgrades, more opportunities for folks to apply for state funding to actually grow PDC capacity. That's really welcome because we know folks want sustainable funding to maintain folks that they've hired to do this work, not only for the Bay TMDL, but for all of their environmental education opportunities. There's been more studies. So we've had a study at George Washington Regional Commission on urban heat island effects, a BMP implementation analysis that was done in Northern Virginia Regional Commission, urban tree canopy assessments at Central Shenandoah PDC. We have a regional water quality monitoring program that we have multiple partners with, and that our regulated entities have been operating for quite some time. So it wasn't necessarily born of this this initiative, but it's something that's been allowed to grow and really start to think about the stormwater impacts that are happening in our region beyond the regulated community. Other new initiatives have been developed through other PDCs like septic relief programs. We're also doing a program here to identify industrial partners for actual BMP implementation for those industrial facilities that might be right along the waterways. So it's really grown. A lot of these new partnerships, this is not an exhaustive list. I just try to include what I could, but there's so much more that my PDC partners are doing. Another thing that we're really good at is coordinating planning and outreach. That's something we've always been good at. That's kind of why these planning districts were developed, is to coordinate all the local governments in a region. And so this has also helped folks really grow some of the programs that either hadn't existed before or existed and they needed to improve upon. We've seen plenty of rain barrel workshops. There's been more updates to hazard mitigation planning, field days where they're really just going out in the public and explaining things to folks. mapping and land use data availability. So there's all kinds of different data portals out there now that folks are creating, and opportunities because of the partnerships they've created through the state and the Bay program. Now, the tricky part, again, as I said, is the implementation piece. This isn't something that, some PDCs are better at than others, but this isn't something that we're really good at or poised to do. It really depends on the needs and wants of your commission, what those elected officials are really asking of your region to do. But in some cases, we've really started to move the needle a little bit. There's been riparian restoration. We're doing a green parking lot demonstration project here at HRPDC. So when folks come in, when we start to retrofit our parking lot and they see the changes and the different and interesting features we're putting in place, they can learn from them, potentially grow from that in their own localities. There is a Living Shorelines initiative, the Northern Neck PDC, significant amounts of tree plantings, native plant demonstration gardens, septic pump out programs. I skipped over the Fight the Flood because that's probably one of the biggest initiatives we've got going on right now in the Middle Peninsula PDC. They have a Living Shorelines and septic repair program where they're just basically providing low interest loans and grants to private property owners to start making these improvements. And they're really growing that program. There's a screenshot there from that program and the money that's been flowing through them as a pass-through entity. So they've been very successful on that front. Not all PDCs are poised to be that successful or have that opportunity to do that. And that's where the increased capacity comes into play. So again, where are some of these roadblocks then? We've been able to grow, but we're kind of plateauing in terms of what some of us can do and some of us can't do. So we might be trying to do more implementation, but we're struggling with the capacity to manage grants. Right now, a lot of folks at the local and regional level are overwhelmed by the funding. There's so many opportunities. Timing has become an issue. So if you don't have a shovel-ready project, or if you don't have a design in place, you might miss that opportunity to apply for that funding. And then finally, what I like to call is the bean counting or the tracking and reporting, whether you're regulated or unregulated. There are differences. The regulated entities have a permit and a motivation to do that tracking and reporting. The unregulated entities don't. So what is being implemented lacks the capacity and basically the people power to actually track and report and maintain those BMPs. We all have competing interests. So whether your staff is focused on one project or another, they've got priorities, so they can't always do everything all the time. Here in Hampton Roads, we have quantity versus quality concerns. There's always the push-pull of economic development and environmental land use planning. So do you have the staff that's focused on one or the other or both holistically? It's not necessarily the case everywhere. And finally, we have funding streams that might have opposite requirements. So again, if you have to prioritize what you're going to go after, do you go after the grant deliverable that's going to give you, or the grant that's going to give you more points for reducing pollutants, for example, versus the grant that might give you more points for reducing flooding? And you can't do both because you don't have the capacity to do so. So there's a lot of that competing interest that's happening that we're trying to work through. And then finally, stakeholders. There's always the capacity to reach more people, or lack of capacity to reach more people, to provide impactful research or outreach to everybody. Are we educating and informing the right people all the time? There's a slew of small watershed groups, roundtables that we work with and partner with, and they're all competing for similar funding. They're all competing for getting more people on board to do the work and the boots on the ground work. So all of those are all related to capacity in some way, shape, or form. I actually did then go reach out to our stormwater managers. Now, this is a group of folks that we meet with regularly. And again, most of them have MS4 permits, so they're part of the regulated community, but several of them don't. And they all share very similar concerns, whether it's related to the Bay TMDL or not, or whether they're required to do things or not. They still have very similar concerns in their localities. So when I asked them to rank their top concerns, it was interesting that climate change and sea level rise and aging infrastructure were the top of the list. It's not surprising, actually, being from where we are, but third on the list was workforce. And that is something that we don't really tackle on a regular basis here at the PDC. We focus on the technical aspects of things, and we focus on the pollutants, but we don't really focus on the workforce needs that they have. So that really jumped out to me. And unfortunately, what fell down to the bottom of the list were the traditional pollutants, the trash, the bacteria, the emerging contaminants. These are things that I am sure they would love to tackle, but maybe they need to address the more emergent issues of climate change, sea level rise, aging infrastructure, and just having people on board to do the work. And then, I asked them another question, if you were given all of these different pots of money, what would you like to fund first? And aging infrastructure, pollution reduction, and flooding were the top three, which is also not surprising. Maybe if you fix one, you'll be able to, fix all the others, who knows? But the fourth on the list is they didn't have the capacity to actually apply. So even with all of the money available, they're all very much struggling with the ability to apply and manage the funding that's coming down the road. So unfortunately, things like addressing BMPs in unregulated land or innovative solutions just aren't really rising to the top of the list right now. So I don't want to be doom and gloom. I know there's a lot that we don't know or need for capacity. So here are some potential near-term solutions that I started thinking about, things that we're actually doing, things that I'd really like to do. Really need to invest in capacity. More technical assistance providers, more people that are translating the information. I really liked the presentation before me. I think that's just fantastic to have a center that's going out there and training the trainers and getting more people involved like that. And I think that needs to happen. Unfortunately, I don't like to have silos, but it does need to happen, in sector specific levels. One thing we're trying to do here is up our staff. We need some more people to help us with finance, contracts, and grant management. We just don't have the staff to handle the projects and the work we want to do, and we hate to see money go by when we can be helping our localities get more of these projects in the ground. Addressing gaps in workforce development is definitely something we need to be working on. And right now, I can't say that I'm working on it, and I'm not sure who is in Hampton Roads, but there was a 2019 LGAC forum that was held, and I think some of the recommendations from that report should be revisited, at least on the Bay watershed scale. Something else I'm not doing, or I need to do more of, is understanding grant requirements and deliverables. This is really challenging. Learn by doing and creating networks are two of the things I'm trying to do better, by applying for the grants, by partnering with people who know how to do this, who've done this work successfully. The more you do it, the more you can pass on that information at the local level and actually say, this is where things went wrong, this is where things went right, and just passing on that information. Other things I'd like to do are reviewing things like burdensome requirements, and looking for templates and easy to use portals. I'd like to talk more to our federal partners about things that say can't be changed, and maybe address some of the things that we'd like to change, or that might make it easier for an entity to apply and get that project in the ground. And finally, I can't say this more, is educate, educate, educate. I was asked by our stormwater managers to provide a Bay 101 for stormwater staff, because, as vacancies happen and we get new people into these positions, we'd really like them to know why there's a Bay TMDL, why we care about local water quality, why it's in their permits, why they don't have a permit, and what they still can do. So I'm going to try to put that together, share knowledge, train the trainer, and really communicate more with my Bay PDC partners is something we here in Virginia can do more of. And building pilots or demonstration projects, that's kind of fits into the learn by doing bucket, but just leading by example is one thing we are really trying hard to do here at the PDC. If you build it, like our parking lot retrofit, and you show it to them, will they learn from it and try to do the same and recreate that in their locality? That is something else we're really striving to do. So finally, because I can't not think of beyond 2025, it's not all about the money, but money helps. And since there's so much of it right now, and we're really struggling with how to deal with it, where do we want all that money to go? In my opinion, because I work with locals and at the regional scale, develop local and regional capacity to help others apply for funding, to manage those grants and contracts, to make that, make them be able to hit the easy button and put projects in the ground, grow more stakeholder engagement, implement more BMPs. I mean, this is things that we all know, but it actually needs, to happen. Promote those alternatives for land use planning, streamline and inform tracking and reporting. These are all things that, if we think about them holistically as a watershed, how we can achieve that, then maybe, all the to-do lists will get checked off. And developing a network of local liaisons is also something I'm really passionate right now, watershed wide, because I do have my Bay PDC partners, I have my local government partners, but I'd really like to start working more with a network beyond Virginia and talking to more people like myself in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and across the watershed, so that we can share knowledge, share resources, offer trainings, identify what's working, and identify and overcome barriers. And also really to start leveraging those smaller watershed groups. We've got roundtables, we've got small NGOs, they're all competing for the same funding. They're all trying to do the real hard boots on the ground work and working with the local governments to make things happen. So if we could potentially develop that network, that would be something else that would help take the burden of lack of capacity off of folks. So, you know, that was a whirlwind tour of stormwater in Virginia, and I could talk forever about all kinds of other initiatives we've got going on and innovations that I think would also help relieve the burden of lack of capacity, but I'll just stop there and I will leave it at that. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Casey. That was really informative. I see that there's 2 questions in the chat, but I think they're both kind of earmarked.
Yeah, I think we'll
for-
save them for discussion at the end because they're both more of they're not really a technical question on the presentation. So I've got them
Great.
down.
Thanks, Ruth. Does anybody have any clarifying questions for Casey that are brief? Okay. If not, we can move on to the last presentation. We have a twofer. We have Katie Bronson and Beth Ginter. Katie Bronson works for USDA Forest Service, and Beth Ginter works for CCLC. Take it away.
Great. Get my screen shared here. All right, how am I looking?
Looks good.
All right, great, thank you. So thanks for the invitation to present to you all today. As Erin said, my name is Katie Brownson. I'm the U.S. Forest Service liaison of the Chesapeake Bay Program and coordinate the forestry work group here. And I'm going to get things started with the foundations of, why we need to build capacity for watershed forestry in the Chesapeake, and then turn it over to Beth with the Chesapeake Conservation and Landscaping Council, who's going to talk about the work that they've actually done doing that capacity building. So just to get started, what's watershed forestry? It's conserving, restoring, and sustainably managing forested lands explicitly for water resources. And while the work is generally terrestrial and can serve multiple goals, it's generally designed to improve or maintain water quality and quantity. So as the definition suggests, these practices are implemented across multiple sectors, including both ag and urban, and also in more natural areas where we already have forests to do the management that's needed to maintain forest health and ecosystem function. In the context of the Bay Program, the focus tends to be on riparian forest buffer restoration and urban tree canopy because we have goals for them in the watershed agreement. The goals in the watershed agreement are ambitious, which reflects the fact that the partnership, recognizes the important role these practices play not only for improving water quality, but also for improving habitat and climate resiliency. So the tree canopy goal that was established was to achieve a net gain in tree canopy by 2,400 acres. We released an indicator for the community tree canopy last year, and we saw that a lot of planting is occurring. In 2021, we estimated that 8,300 acres were planted, but the scale of loss is currently far outpacing our planting efforts. So in addition to that really critical conservation work that needs to happen to kind of stem the tide of that loss, much more additional planting is going to be needed. Luckily, there is a lot of funding for urban and community tree planting efforts right now. Just in U.S. Forest Service funding alone, there's $100 million that's been awarded or in the process of being awarded in grants to support urban and community forestry in disadvantaged communities in the watershed, which is really exciting. But it means that urban and community forestry programs are needing to build capacity really quickly to support rolling out literally millions of dollars and to ensure that there's that local capacity and workforce within those communities to maintain the trees over the long term. So it's not just a one and done. For riparian forest buffers, also set an ambitious goal to plant 900 miles of forest buffers per year, and states set even more ambitious goals in their watershed implementation plans. The bars are pretty small, but we have been making steady progress over the last few years. We think largely thanks to investments that have been made in effective, flexible buffer programs, and in hiring the people that are needed to support these programs, but clearly much more is needed. So in order to think about how we're going to fill that gap, I think it's helpful to kind of clarify the process of implementation to understand where we need additional capacity. So this slide was adapted from a C-Stream intern, Will McGrath, who did some work over the summer evaluating capacity building needs for forest buffers in particular. And so, it really starts with finding willing landowners, then moving to doing the site visits and assessments, creating the plan and securing funding sources, before we even get to the actual planting itself, and then of course the follow-up maintenance and checkups that are really critical. One note is that a lot of times the actual planting itself and the maintenance work is done by contractors or volunteers. And of course there's capacity issues there as well. So just focusing on those initial steps before the actual planting, we'll try to do kind of a back of the napkin type calculation to evaluate how much additional capacity is actually needed to get to our goals. And through interviews, we'll have found that on average, a single staff person can support planting about 40 acres per year on average. So doing some math to evaluate the gap between 2021 progress and that 900 mile per year goal and converting miles to acres, he found that 203 additional staff people would be needed, which is a lot. And it is a back of the napkin calculation, but it really just does demonstrate the significant need and the need to think about how we can kind of fundamentally change our model, either to streamline the process of implementation, as well as kind of better supporting capacity building and retention within the organizations doing the work. And this is caveated by the fact that this doesn't account for the additional support staff that would be needed within organizations to support those 200 people if we had them tomorrow, and doesn't account for also limitations in contractor ability that would kind of slow down the actual planting work. So here are some of the challenges for building more capacity based on what we've been hearing from our partners. As I mentioned, right now, there is a lot of funding available for implementation, but not nearly as much funding available to support the staff or for the follow-up maintenance that's needed over the long term to ensure that those trees can be successfully established and cared for. And then there are also other bottlenecks that arise, like I just mentioned, including that contractor issue. In some places, particular New York, I know has struggled with inadequate access to contractors, so they have to rely more on volunteers and staff for plantings. But also just having that capacity within organizations to manage bigger staffs and do all the grants administration work is a really big challenge. And that's compounded by the fact that our current mode of funding implementation through relatively short-term grants makes it really difficult to establish those kind of stable, well-paid, permanent positions, and to do that broader capacity building within organizations if you're not sure if you're going to have funding beyond a few years out. Which brings up the issue of retention. So once we build all this capacity, how do we sustain it and kind of create career pathways so people want to stay in the field and don't move on? I know as some of the other presenters mentioned as well. So here are a few ways we think could help build some capacity. For grant-funded projects, working to improve grant terms could help. Fewer, bigger, long-term grants could limit the amount of time staff are needing to focus on grant writing and administration and give them more time to actually do the work and to have the confidence to kind of build that capacity within their organizations and retain it over time. So, this also speaks to the opportunity to think about how we can kind of streamline the process of implementation to kind of limit the capacity that's needed to do the work in addition to building capacity. But ultimately, identifying longer-term sustained funding sources to support programs can help support that longer-term capacity building. So as an example, the Virginia Environmental Endowment, they've provided stable long-term funding for the James River Buffer Program, which has been a really great way for them to kind of build up a really effective program and build the capacity they need to support that program, knowing that they have this kind of long-term funding. There's also some efficiencies that can be gained, through cross-sector collaboration, but also through cross-partner collaboration within the same sector, as some of the other speakers have noted. So an example here, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, they do have a forestry program, but they also have a very quickly growing ag program. And their ag program is now requiring that producers in Pennsylvania have riparian forest buffers as a condition for receiving funds to do other practices. So their ag people can kind of help do that work with the producers on the ground to help them do that outreach for forest buffer practices as well. And then this last point on improving programs to limit needed outreach is along the lines of what I mentioned earlier about just like reducing the amount of work that we need to do to get buffers planted and get trees planted. The good programs speak for themselves, and they speak through word of mouth. Some of our partners have told us they don't actually need to do any outreach because people are coming to them. So investing in these programs that are already really effective and helping them scale up, as well as improving other programs to be more effective where needed, can just help reduce the amount of staff time that's needed for outreach and let the staff that they have actually focus their time on doing the work and building the relationships with landowners and getting the trees planted and cared for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth Ginter, who's going to talk a bit more about how we can actually do some of this work to build capacity. So I am going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Katie. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Ginter, and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council. We're based in Maryland, but we work across the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and the focus of our work is providing education, training, materials, and support to landscape professionals and others who are looking to advance their careers, get into the workforce, and focus on sustainable practices, conservation, green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. So one of the really important hallmarks of our work is our collaborations. I think that's a common theme today. We've heard a lot about that. We can't do this work alone. And so our collaborations and partnerships with people on this call and many people in this audience have made our program so much stronger. And I'm going to talk today about our efforts in watershed forestry, and specifically focused on training on riparian buffer planning, implementation, and management. So our signature program is called the Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Training. At the heart of what we do are our professional credentials, level 1 and level 2 certifications. We have, I think right now, about 1,350 people who are level 1 certified. So we're a pretty new program. We started in 2016, but you can tell by those numbers that it's been extremely popular. People are very hungry for this training, and landscape professionals in particular are beginning to look for different niches for their business. They're expanding their practice area, and they're understanding that the impacts they have in the landscape every day are significant. So we're really gratified to see so many people moving towards conservation in their practice. So one of the things that has happened over the last couple of years is that we have developed some new trainings, and I'm going to talk to you about our CBLP buffers, which is one standalone certificate course. It's a 3-part training that's designed to give a comprehensive overview of how to plan, implement, and manage riparian buffers. We have had an amazing group of instructors and partners who are providing scholarships to incentivize participation. Most recently, Maryland DNR has worked with us to support bringing the training to Maryland. So we taught in Maryland for the first time in 2023, and we've been teaching this in Pennsylvania and Virginia over the course of the last few years since 2020. And this program also, we have been working to bring this buffer training to audiences in correctional facilities. We had a GIT grant to collaborate with the Pennsylvania DCNR and the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections and the Alliance to develop a training and refine a training that was already going on in Pennsylvania. And that included the CBLP buffer modules. Since then, we've been working with an incredible collaborative team, the James River Association, Virginia Cooperative Extension, the Virginia Department of Corrections, Dave Hirschman, and our organization. We have been teaching CBLP buffers to women incarcerated at the State Farm in Virginia since 2021, and we have 19 people now who completed that buffer certificate. And we're really excited about the potential for connecting some of these women with employment. It hasn't happened yet. People who are returning to their communities after being incarcerated have a lot of challenges, and some of them are moving away from the area. And so we are continuing to work on that effort to try to get those folks connected with some employment. Whoops. There we go. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about something that we did with funding from the Riparian Consortium in Virginia in 2022. We wanted to talk to contractors about working on riparian buffers. So we pulled together a group of contractors who are doing buffer work to talk to them about, find out what their challenges and opportunities are, and figure out how we can grow this workforce. That's really an important objective for this buffer training, is to get more boots on the ground doing buffer work. So we pulled people together, and here are some of the key learnings from that roundtable. There are a lot of challenges facing these folks. It's really hard, challenging work, and it's quite different from many projects that landscape contractors are doing. They've also been really struggling with rising costs and figuring out how to manage funding sources. Many of them are working with grant-funded projects, and we're finding that many of those are going to the low bid, which is not great for people who have these specialized skills and specialized workforces. So here's some things that we've been doing coming out of that training. We are specifically in Virginia, working with organizations and chambers of commerce, including the Latin Chamber of Commerce in Virginia, trying to get a better understanding of potential contractors who may be interested in doing buffer work. And we are also continuing to offer partner-funded scholarships to get more people into the training. So those are a couple things that we're doing. We've also been defining the profile, like what's an ideal person to recruit for this work? Because as I said, it's a little bit different from most landscape contractor jobs. And many people who work on mowing grass are really not going to like this work. So we are trying to expand these pipelines, and we're aligning to work with several different organizations that are training young adults for conservation work and bringing that buffer training to them. And as the follow-on to the Business of Buffers roundtable that we did in the summer of 2022, we have an online webinar that is coming up in March, which is really kind of the nuts and bolts of working on riparian buffers. how to manage protocols, schedules, what tools and equipment you need, how to train your crews, figuring out how to work with nonprofits, because these are for-profit businesses. Many of them have no experience with grants and nonprofits. So that's an important part of this training. And then figuring out how to make it profitable, because again, these are for-profit businesses and they don't want to be doing this work if they can't realize some profit from that. And we are also continuing our CBLP buffers training. And this year we'll be offering an urban buffer design charrette. This is something that we did a couple of years ago, and we'll be repeating that in the late summer or early fall. And I would just say that we're really excited about this webinar. We'll have, it's being led by a contractor named Justin Ulanowski, who does a lot of riparian buffer work in Pennsylvania. And we're going to have a panel of other contractors from around the watershed who are actively involved in buffer implementation and maintenance, and really trying to entice more contractors who are in our CBLP network, and others are welcome, of course, to convert some of their business to doing this work. Okay, and that's all I got. Thanks so much again for having me.
Thank you so much, Katie and Beth. I appreciate all you've had to say. So I think we have until 12:30, and I know we have some time to do discussion now. So I'll invite the panelists to turn your cameras on. I see you've already done that. And maybe Ruth, can you pick out a first question that we received to have a discussion?
Yes. Yeah. We, during Casey's presentation, we had a question from Kaylin Gutman concerning workforce development. So she wanted to know, do you have any thoughts on how specifically the Chesapeake Bay Program partnership could help with workforce development needs across the watershed?
Thanks, Kaylin. I think specifically off the top of my head, no, but I did go back and look at that LGAC report from the forum in 2019, and there were 4 recommendations there. Some I think might need some revisiting. Some make sense. You know, should the states be doing a needs assessment of their workforce status? Maybe they should be. But another recommendation was to look at examples, and we just had one. CBLP was actually highlighted in that report, and I think it's a great program. We are working very closely with our partners at CBLP here to do a brownfields design charrette, for example. But the trainings that they offer are great, but we need more like them, and we need more reason to train them. And so the other piece, though, is specifically related to local governments, and I think that finding that I'm not sure if it's the pipeline that needs to be evaluated, if it's the training that needs to happen, but for whatever reason, folks are not flocking to these jobs. If it's the amount of pay that they're receiving or benefits, lack of benefits, I don't know. But I think that's something that has to happen in terms of maybe an evaluation. So maybe revisiting that LGAC report and figuring out another way to tackle some of the recommendations that were offered there, because I really don't know what's happened since that report, frankly.
Thanks, Casey. Really appreciate it. And, I think this is something really important to highlight. And as we, in the beyond 25 world, but outside of that too, I just want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the fray. There's a lot rolling towards 25, and workforce development in all sectors is critically important to what the future looks like. So thanks.
Well, I'll just add really quick, is one of the recommendations was to promote, green infrastructure. Well, I think we're really good at that right now, but do we have the folks to actually implement the green infrastructure? That piece has not been tackled, in my opinion.
Katie, you have your hand up. Do you want to address that question too, or respond?
Yeah, I know it wasn't directed to me, but I know one thing we've been talking about in some of the Beyond 2025 discussions is, the potential role that the Bay Program can play in being that kind of like network of networks. So, I think there's potentially a role for us in like bringing together some of these workforce development programs that are already happening, so we can be like learning from each other and coordinating and getting the word out, so people like know what all the opportunities even are. I think there's a lot that's going to be happening over the next few years, especially with all the implementation money that's coming out. So I think that could be a potential role for the Bay program too, and kind of the broader landscape.
I see some comments from Kristen Saunders. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and put what you did in the chat. Otherwise, you can see her comments in the chat. Everybody.
Sure, I'm happy to. I was typing as fast as I could, but I couldn't keep up when Katie was talking. We do have 2 Gold Team funded projects that are underway right now. And both of them really are meant to address exactly the things that Casey and Katie and Kaylin were just talking about. The Gold Team funded project for workforce development came out of the LGAC recommendations. And we did have a member of LGAC sitting on the project steering committee. That work is being done by a contractor, but the idea is to look at what are the workforce training needs that each of the goal implementation teams or folks at the local level have identified as things that are critical to them meeting their implementation. And then to survey the workforce training programs that exist out there, because we didn't want to try to recreate or create new when something already existed. So the idea is to connect to those workforce training programs to find out which ones support the work we need. And if there are gaps, to try to hone in on where we can help to fill those gaps. And commensurate with that, there's also a GIT funded project that's looking at identifying the network of networks that exist out there in the watershed. And the hope is that those 2 projects combined will help us address some of these workforce training needs, either tapping into existing networks or into existing workforce development programs. And where they don't exist, try to figure out how we might resource some of those to support the green infrastructure and stormwater and riparian forest buffer and ag practices that we know need to happen. So it's underway. I'm guessing that both of those will probably be more definitive for us later this calendar year. And we can certainly share those results out with folks as they become available.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm really excited to hear what is happening. I think sometimes when we have such a broad network of work happening across a broad geographic region, sometimes we don't necessarily know the work that's being done that hasn't necessarily been published yet. So thank you so much for giving us that update. I did see in the chat, Laura Cattle-Knoll and Casey Filipino both put the LGAC report in from 2019. So if anybody wants to see that, they can go ahead and see those links in the chat. I think we can move on to the next question so we can keep the conversation rolling. Ruth, do you want to move the next?
Yeah, I'll move on in a second. Just with respect to workforce development, before we move on, I think another, and Laura Catell-Knoll can speak much better to this, but I did want to mention there one other huge recommendation from LGAC is regarding circuit riders. And, they pointed out that every jurisdiction, or at least most of the jurisdictions, have some form of program that seeks to create and support circuit riders. And that funding for those programs really is one way that the Bay program can support those efforts that are already ongoing. And so that's another thing that came out of the LGAC recommendations regarding workforce, just expanding capacity in general for a workforce. Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
No, nothing, Ruth. I'll put a link in the chat to the LGAC letter that kind of highlights how, all the states in the watershed have taken kind of different approaches to that. But, the Local Government Advisory Committee continues to see a need for that technical assistance and capacity building at the local level. So excited for this whole conversation today.
Thanks. We had a second question for Casey, I think, from Katie Bronson, and that was about the opportunity to clarify the potential co-benefits of some water quality restoration practices for climate change resilience to better speak to the concerns of stormwater managers. So I think she was asking, is there an opportunity to do that?
Yes, there's definitely, and I think a lot of that work is ongoing. It's different, I think, state by state, because stormwater folks have different requirements of what can go in the ground, what those efficiency are. efficiencies are for pollutants. And for Virginia, for example, quality and quantity don't necessarily match. So if you have a quantity problem, you might not be able to put the BMP you want for quality in. So we're working on that. We actually have a funded program project here at the PDC to look specifically at BMPs in the coastal plain to start matching up those. I know there's work going on within the Bay program on that too, with modeling work group, urban stormwater work group. I'm not sure who else. It just got recently funded, so there's more coming on that. And then, you know, Katie, it makes me think of trees too, because trees are so important and yet so divergent in terms of water quality, quantity, and then for us, especially here, when you have you want more trees, but everybody's afraid of trees because of storms. So it's also the messages too around being resilient and what that means if you're afraid of trees too. So it's definitely that work that needs to be done and continue to be done, but certainly is underway.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on, sort of down into the forestry presentation, we had a comment from Dean Hively, basically about more emphasis or funding being devoted to maintaining plantings. I guess you're more specifically talking about tree canopy and things that go on in urban areas, but he's pointing out that a lot of the energy goes into planting, but not maintenance. So could more emphasis and funding be devoted to maintaining plantings or expanding capacity for maintenance?
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I just want to say like that is really underpinning everything that we do here. The lack of maintenance is really jarring. And as somebody who travels around the watershed looking at green infrastructure practices and meadows and buffers and living shorelines, it's just so sad to see that lack of maintenance. And so it's really part of our mission is to help to move the needle on that. So an important part of all the training that we do is like what's going to happen to this practice when you're done designing it or building it. Who's going to be maintaining it? What is their money situation? How much money do they have? What's their capacity to do the maintenance? Do they know what a rain garden or a riparian buffer is? So that is at the front of everything that we do. And we're actively advocating for that funding from our grantors as well. And just making sure that it's part of the design conversation for any of these projects, you know, asking those questions about the long-term care of the practice.
Yeah, that was a great response, Beth. And I just add on a little bit. I think, you know, one of the things we've been talking about the forestry work group, and actually one of the recommendations I think that's kind of emerging from the tree canopy funding and policy roundtable is the need to like fund local tree care professionals who are just there as their job to like do that maintenance work. And that you know, Casey even speaking to the need you identified, doing the pruning that's needed and making sure everything is like taken care of the way it needs to be to like ensure that the tree grows well and ensure that people are happy with the trees that are there, so they, you know, don't want to get rid of them. So I think having that like dedicated funding for staff to actually take care of the trees is really important. In some cases, like a, you know, more of a volunteer, like community stewardship model can work, you know, if there is kind of a community that's really invested in a project and, you know, they really want to take care of it. But relying on volunteers exclusively to do the maintenance isn't always the best strategy because, you know, people leave, people come and go, people have other things to do with their lives besides take care of trees. So having that like dedicated staff capacity, I think, is really important where possible.
And I think in some instances for the Alliance, I think at least of what they're doing in Pennsylvania, when they implement a buffer, in some cases they include that maintenance for, I think, 3 to 5 years as an incentive for the farmer or producer. So
yeah,
go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ruth. And yeah, that's sort of like turnkey model where, you know, a program will come in, they'll do all the work, they'll do the maintenance, you know, for the 3 to 5 years when that's like when it's most needed to ensure successful establishments. I think programs like that are great, where it's just kind of baked into the planting.
Any other questions before we move on? We have, we have one question along the same lines as what we were talking about before, which is the capacity for workforce, but this one is dealing with staff turnover. So it's pointing out that many organizations working on these issues are experiencing high degree of staff turnover, related at least in part to inadequate salaries. So are any organizations working with employers to offer salaries that to retain institutional knowledge? How else do we address turnover? So if anyone has novel approaches to that.
Jump in a little bit on this. And I think the salary issue is somewhat universal and is complicated, and it's going to be difficult to address, not just in this sector, but I think nationally, and it's a problem. But it's one of the things I was talking about a little bit is some of the long-term goals here with the center in Pennsylvania in the ag sector with ag conservation professionals is looking at, I mean, we are not ignoring the salary piece, and we are certainly having that conversation too, but we're looking at the non-salary benefits that can be provided and really making professional development, career pathways, certifications, growth opportunities exist within these careers so that they aren't just entry level forever opportunities that don't go anywhere. So that's a big part of our conversation here. And just really thinking about kind of where it goes from here, thinking about what levels of opportunities we can discuss with the powers that be that really do create the jobs, because we don't necessarily control the employers and the opportunities. And what happens here in Pennsylvania is we get folks in the, and I'm sure this is everywhere, but we get folks in the public sector, in the county conservation districts, and the government jobs. They get a lot of training because that's what those organizations can afford to offer when it's not salary. And then the private industry takes very nicely trained public sector employees and pulls them away with their better salaries, but the private sector doesn't really have those training opportunities. So if we can make sure the training exists in all sectors, then we don't lose those well-trained public sector employees to the private industry so quickly. That's one thing. And then the other piece is just really thinking about permanency in positions and not grant funded short-term contract. I mean, this is our sector and it has been for decades. We really need to start investing in not just practices on the ground, but the people who make them happen, and continue to re-emphasize with whether it's legislature or it's private industry or whoever is funding practices that they need to fund people, because it's just not going to work any other way.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for addressing that. Anyone else have anything to add on that score? Okay, I wanted to go ahead, and we're getting down to the wire. Jeremy, stop me when you need me to be quiet. I wanted to draw attention to a couple of comments in the chat. One is actually from now I just lost the comment, but it was from Beth Ginter about having a directory. Here it is, where that they have a directory on the website, on their website, so that governments and NGOs and others can connect with level 1 certified pros. And they're going to have a list of those who have completed the CBLP buffers and shoreline certificates coming onto that site shortly. So that's awesome. I think there was an exchange between Kristen Wolf and Kristen Sanders, but we'll be putting that information out as well. And I think that one was kind of asked and answered. And lastly, getting down to, because I think we had one more question for Jen from Caitlin Gutman, which I wanted to get to. What are the top 2 things you are most excited about with the center over the next 5 years?
You know, I saw that question go by and I sort of selfishly was thinking about the things that I'm excited about because they benefit me personally as opposed to the grand vision of the center. But I got to be honest with you, I spent the first year of the center really as a one-woman show because we were getting up and running. And so I think the number one thing I'm excited about is the staff that we have brought on. They are amazing. They are excellent. They work really well together, and getting them out to see the world and get everybody familiar with them is the number one thing I'm excited about, because I think you're all going to benefit from who they are and what they have to offer. So to me, that's number one. Number two, of course, is really getting some of the big programs of the center open to everyone to participate in. We've been kind of piloting and had some limited release in audiences and been a little restricted, and just making those opportunities available. And some of that is showcasing the work of others. We already partnered with Beth and CCLC once last summer and continuing to do that. You know, again, just collaboration. We don't need to create our own training on buffers when there are great people out there doing that work already. So just tapping the rest of you to be part of what the center is offering will be a big part of what we do.
Thank you. More, Jeremy, do we have time to keep going, or did you want?
Yeah,
time
I
for
don't have much
closure?
to say, so if
Or
you need
Aaron?
another minute or two.
I think that there's one last question. There's only one last question right in the
Yeah.
chat, Ruth, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's Liz's. Yeah, why don't you
Yeah.
hit us with that one, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So, and Liz, you might want to speak to this because you have a ... but it says sort of hypothetical municipalities are getting funding to design and implement and getting PRP, pollution reduction plan credits, etc. But where are we with ensuring buffers are maintained to show that future credits are deserved? Some municipalities have programs trained with the CBLP, have budget, but others, and I'm assuming to say that they don't have those resources. So anyone have anything to say about that?
I could jump in a little on that, and others can correct me or add on, but so in at least for the Bay program, all practices have a credit expiration. So for forest buffers, you only get credit for 15 years, and then you have to go out and re-verify that the practice is still there and functioning as intended. You know, hopefully it's not just you know, go once and then go again in 15 years, because we know that's not adequate. So I think, you know, in the planting plans, usually there's a plan for all the follow-up maintenance and how that's going to happen, and that should be like a condition of getting the credit in the first place. But how that plays out, I think, probably varies a bit depending on the state and who's actually implementing the practice.
Thanks, Katie.
Any
Thank you,
other...
everybody.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think it's good. I think I'll pass it to Jeremy to wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thanks again to all our speakers and to Aaron and Ruth for recruiting this great lineup that we've had today. And thank you, everyone who has joined us. We will do our best to capture the chat and also share that and make sure we didn't miss anything important. But there is a feedback form linked in the chat a few times by me, so please take a minute to at least do the required questions and a couple more open-ended questions if you have thoughts. I will be posting the recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. If I don't do that, it will happen early next week. I will message all the registered participants for today, whether they're here or not. If you registered, you'll get the notification that the YouTube recording is live, and that I'll include the feedback form link again at that time if you don't get to it today. So this will certainly not be the last time that the water quality goal implementation team or other partnership groups talk about this topic. We heard a couple projects in the works already that seem like could be maybe future agenda topics for us or other groups. So we'll certainly be revisiting this topic, maybe with different slate or different combination of speakers, and hope to continue this discussion with all of you again. So thank you for your time. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Good to
Thank
see
you,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Beth.
Take care.